Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the fourth and final webinar of Navigating Change, a series focused on sustainable recovery for small businesses, brought to you by Bank of the West, Protect Our Winters, and Snowsports Industries America. My name is Dan Ossipo from Bank of the West, and I'm very proud of the series we put together over the last month that has highlighted trends and presented practical improvements for small businesses in the wake of the pandemic. As we know, while COVID has redefined how we do business, new opportunities are emerging for how businesses can adapt to survive now and even flourish in the future. As mentioned, today's event is the final webinar in the series, so a big thank you to everyone who has joined us and taken part in these relevant conversations. That said, I'd like to present today's topic, Why Cause Matters, Consumer Loyalty in Purchase Decisions. Before we jump in, and for the last time, I'd like to cover some of the small housekeeping items for the webinar. All video and audio of attendees will be muted throughout, and Q&A will be live throughout, and the moderator will pull those questions in and utilize them for Q&A for about 10 minutes at the end. And now to introduce the folks that have joined us for today's event, our moderator and good friend, U.S. Ski Team Hall of Famer, Chris Davenport, and our panelists, Kate Williams, CEO 1% for the Planet, Jenn Swain, Global Senior Sustainability Manager, Burton, and Brady Robinson, Executive Director, the Conservation Alliance. Once again, thanks for all for joining. And Chris, take it away and have a great conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dan. Thanks for the introduction, and a big welcome to all of our attendees today. Thanks for joining in. Certainly want to welcome our panelists, Brady, Kate, and Jenn. We are going to have a really exciting conversation today around the concept of cause and why cause matters and why consumer loyalty is so important. I want to remind everybody that you can ask us questions. Put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And as we get towards the end of our conversation that I'm moderating, we'll bring in some of your questions. And the idea is really to get some insights, some advice, some tips from these experts as to how you can help your small business. So with that said, let's get going here. I want to start, Jenn, with you this morning. Welcome from Vermont. And to start off, I want to explore this idea of consumer loyalty. I think it's incredible what Burton has done around that, and specifically how it relates to purchasing decisions. I think a good place to start is that Protect Our Winters, one of our presenting sponsors, they recently came out with some research that showed that I think 76% of consumers and outdoor enthusiasts, they want some direction as to where to start taking action on climate change. So when you're an outdoor consumer brand like Burton, how do you take a piece of information like that and start to try and activate people, your customers, around it?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris, and thank you to the webinar sponsors as well. You know, sustainability we know matters to the Burton customer even more than the average outdoor participant in the US. From a combination of the research you mentioned from POW and also Burton's own internal customer insights, we know that half of our customers say that the environment is something they think about regularly and they're incorporating positive changes in their own lives when they can. That's compared to 39% of the general outdoor consumer in the US. We also know that, you know, snowboarding is really core to Burton. And nearly a third of snowboarders have indicated that they volunteered or donated particularly to climate change organizations, compared to 17% of outdoor participants. So we know that really authentically, you know, sustainability and climate activism in particular is important to our customer. But it is really hard, we've heard from our customers, to connect those dots of how do you go from taking individual action on things like greening your commute or, you know, eating a more plant-rich diet to really multiplying your impact as an individual. And what we really firmly believe in at Burton is advocacy. And so the way that we try to connect with our customer in this area that's kind of beyond product, right? Like as a brand, using our full brand reach, is to help empower our customers to take action on policy. And so one thing that we've learned from the recent POW research relates to kind of how we can approach messaging in a way that's most effective. How do we actually motivate outdoor enthusiasts to take action with us? So starting from a place of someone who cares about the outdoors, we really need to put people at the center. So what we get to is the crisis, what we get to is the urgency, but we really need to ground ourselves in the people, the place that they love, that they play, the issue, and then provide that call to action, those resources to help them actually take action alongside us, whether that's through, a more local like mountain cleanup, or through actually advocating, raising their voice on policy issues as well.
I think it's really interesting how a lot of companies like Burton no longer look at the consumer as just this person who purchases things from your brand. You're looking at them more like brand advocates. Like, yes, they buy stuff, but you're asking a lot more of them. Just one more follow-up question. How long ago was it sort of in your experience that there was this sort of transition from consumers just being consumers to, as you said, more of like a brand advocate?
That's a tough one. I would say that we've really seen, if we look at corporate responsibility, corporate sustainability on the whole, the first kind of 20 years was really focused on sustainable products from a brand perspective. So getting a certification, whether it's fair trade on the social side, organic on the eco-conscious environmental side. But we've really seen over the last 15 to 20 years is the shift toward looking at a whole company, a really comprehensive evaluation of a brand. And that is what is breeding that loyalty. It's no longer about the product. It's the expectation that a company on the whole is taking action that has positive impacts for people and the environment. And so I think it makes a company almost a little more human, right? Like, you want to engage more because you see the passion of the company and what they're working toward. And so I would say, really in the last, 10 to 20 years, we're seeing that shift. And it also really matters if you as a business are reaching out to your consumers and really asking them to engage with you in that way.
I think that's a great answer. I think companies that care, companies that take a stand, are companies that I care about, because it just resonates with me. So thank you for that. Okay, for Kate and Brady, your organizations and you specifically work with a lot of brands around causes that their customers are very passionate about, much like Burton. Are there any particular examples that come to mind so that other business owners might be able to draw some lessons, or perhaps get a good sense of, I guess, like a blueprint for that success? Kate, why don't we start with you?
Sure. And I always hate to call out any particular company because all of our members are doing such great work. So just a caveat on that are, all of our companies are, engaging with their consumers and making a difference in a very real way. But a couple of examples of how aligning with a cause can actually be good for business. And, we're seeing that more and more. One really clear example is from one of our members, Finlandia Vodka. And they did a promotion in certain markets and not in other markets, not so much for the test purposes, but it just so happened to work out that way. And they had very clear point of sale information about the giving that they were doing through 1% for the Planet at certain bars and retail locations, whereas in other markets, they just weren't doing that. And during the time period, they saw a 7% increase in sales in those markets where they activated, and actually a decrease in sales by 2% in other markets. And, we can't point to direct causation, but that's a pretty clear example given the way those markets were set up, that there was a correlation between engaging customers in a chance to say, hey, brand with a cause, I'm going to choose that, versus not providing that opportunity. And then another example, specific example, is a company called Sunski. And I don't have that same like market to market comparison, but what they've done is a great example of kind of a dialogue with their consumers. So they started out as a fabulous 1% for the Planet brand, giving back. But then they heard from their consumers. They heard from their nonprofit partners. They heard from other members in the network, hey, you're doing a great job with your giving, but you still have a lot of plastic in your packaging. And actually the frames of your sunglasses are plastic. And so while they got into 1% for the Planet for that like story around their giving, the network actually pushed them to now in 2020 have developed a way of manufacturing fully recycled frames, eliminating all plastic from their packaging, and really taking that next step. So they kind of develop loyalty and consumer goodwill through the relationship that they developed with them. And we're seeing that broadly across our network. So again, like back to all members, in our most recent brand survey, we saw that our brand awareness has grown by more than 150% over the past 3 years. And purchase intent this year, which is the surveyed consumers' intent to purchase items that had the logo on it, was at 45%. So, it's really great to see that not only is it, the right thing to do for the planet, but it is tied for these businesses. It's tied to a good consumer relationship and return.
Yeah, that's great. It's no surprise, I think, that organizations like yourselves are getting more visibility, I guess, during this time. Brady, over to you with the same question. What are you seeing in terms of specific, I guess, cases that you could share that other brands are doing out there?
Yeah, I've got a few, and similar to Kate, I want to mention that by calling these out, we're not saying everybody isn't doing a great job, but I just want to remind people that the Conservation Alliance harnesses the power of businesses and outdoor communities to advocate for the protection of wild places in North America. We have a grant program, we do advocacy, and 100% of our member dues go into our grant making program. But a few that come to mind, Keen, the shoe company, did something called Live Monumental back when President Obama, do you remember when we had the president's name was Obama? It seems like it's another world. But there was a lead up into designating some really key landscapes as national monuments. And so Keen got behind that and built a year-long campaign. They called it Live Monumental. And they weren't directly selling shoes during that time, but it was their most successful brand campaign to date in terms of social impressions, earned media, and brand recognition. So they did see a lot of value there. Another one that comes to mind is New Belgium, the beer company, did something called Finding Common Ground. They released these really interesting videos that were bridging the gap between user communities, outdoor user communities that traditionally maybe don't view themselves as being either part of the same community or perhaps even on the same team. They linked a climber and a hunter, an off-roader and a mountain biker, and an angler and a kayaker to kind of explore shared values. And again, they couldn't directly link, increased beer sales to that, but they had a lot of engagement, got a lot of brand recognition out of it. And they also deepened their relationships with existing nonprofit partners. But just in case people think, well, those are big companies, what can I do? I've got two other quick examples. There's an incredible trail mix company called Share, and 20% of their profits benefit our grant program, the Conservation Alliance's grant program. And they built that in at the start. So, we don't have to be the beneficiary, but you, as a small company, you can make a commitment like that. And then there's a company called Catella. They make, based in Colorado, make custom awards. And one-person shop, and Lisa comes to Washington, D.C. for our annual fly-ins and has become a really powerful advocate and works on projects in her backyard. So I think there are really meaningful things, creative things that companies of all sizes can do.
Those are great examples, Brady, and also thank you for sharing a little bit of insight into what the Conservation Alliance does. Before I go to Jenn with a question, Kate, I did want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about 1% for the Planet. I apologize for not bringing that up earlier, but maybe you could just let us know exactly what 1% is doing, and maybe also talk a little bit about what sustainable recovery looks like from your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, it was fun to just dive right into the question. But I'm happy to come back and share. 1% for the Planet is a global nonprofit. We have about half of our membership is in the U.S. and half is international. And our members are primarily businesses, although we do have some individuals. And to be a member, you commit to giving 1% of your top line sales to environmental nonprofits. And we serve as the advisor and amplifier of that giving. We help companies to identify their giving partners and develop those strategies. And in the last year, we certified about 27 million in giving and have seen some really great growth as companies have grown with us and as bigger companies have come on to join with us. And I think in terms of sustainable recovery, it looks a little different for everyone because everyone's experiencing this pandemic differently. But I think one of the things that we're seeing with a lot of our members is that the power of being able to adapt and to, identify what are the sort of core skills and strengths and commitments that you have that are durable regardless of the environment. So we have, mattress companies making masks and doing a great job of that, and having strong sales with that. We have other companies, a restaurant that's pivoting to providing meals and tapping into their network of farms to provide meals for the hungry. And some of those are temporary pivots, but they're keeping people employed and they're keeping things working. And so I think adaptability, and then for the longer term, I think sustainable recovery looks like learning from what we're seeing and using this opportunity to kind of develop new ways of doing business that are durable.
Thanks, Kate. Jenn, we'll go over to you, and maybe you can just also touch on what a sustainable recovery means to you personally and also from the Burton perspective. Before you jump into that, I just want to also remind our attendees that as we go through the webinar today, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A button at the bottom, and we will definitely address those as we move forward. Okay, Jenn from Burton Snowboards, sustainable recovery, and then I've got a more specific question for you.
Great. Yeah, right now, society is weathering the dual storms of COVID-19, climate change, while also reckoning with issues of social justice, from racial injustice to wealth disparity to the protection of workers' rights around the world. So in the face of really compounding crises, we see an opportunity for an equitable, resilient, and regenerative recovery. We need to find hope at times, and we need to take action when there is this benefit almost of urgency. So, as many have said, what we need to be looking to do as a society is to build back better. And this must be driven by governments, but it also has to be through evolved business practices. And I really feel that businesses that are putting people first right now, that are prioritizing and supporting their employees, their communities, and their customers, are going to emerge stronger on the other side of the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's no question that businesses that reach out to their customers throughout this trying time and ask them how they're doing, or just connect, that's building meaningful relationships. Specifically, Jenn, I think there's a thought out there that to add sustainability or environmental responsibility to one's business comes at a cost, and that upfront cost might be scary or daunting for businesses when they think about the ROI of sustainability. So how do you overcome that?
I won't sugarcoat it. It is hard to measure sustainability performance in financial terms. There are certain opportunities that we find where actually sustainability leads to efficiency. There are other times where, to improve product sustainability on an environmental attribute might actually come with a cost in the short term. So what we're really thinking about at Burton is the benefit to long-term, customer lifetime value, customer loyalty, to the value of the brand over time as a result of sustainability. And I think, while corporate sustainability used to be seen as exceptional, it's increasingly the expectation of customers. And I think that goes across industries. So as a business, I really think that the long-term risk of inaction might be greater than the short-term cost of action. And I think this is particularly showing up as we look at increasing customer awareness of business practices through the pandemic. So a survey that was conducted earlier this year, 73% believed that moving forward after the pandemic, companies really need to be prioritizing the needs of all stakeholders and not just financial reward. And that shows up in all aspects of responsible business practices. So I really think that it's a business imperative. We are increasingly seeking to measure it better than we're able to now. But I think if you think of it in different terms than the financial, whether you want to look at the compliance side of things, the efficiency gains, the ability to draw, employees who are going to be more loyal to the brand as well. Increasingly just in our interviewing process, we're hearing that people are drawn to work for the brand because of our efforts. So I think it's really a full picture.
I really like your quote, and I'm going to paraphrase, but the long-term cost of inaction is much greater than the short-term cost of action. You said something to that effect. That's really interesting, because I think we oftentimes just think of those upfront costs, and you guys are looking long-term about consumer loyalty and building customers for the future. So that's really great. Kate, you mentioned, and this is a good segue from that 1% for the Planet has grown during this pandemic and the quarantine. But what are the obstacles that you see for brands traditionally to get involved in sustainability or climate or just activism in general? And why do they seem to maybe be reduced, or those doors are sort of more open right now?
It's a great question, and we've definitely been trying to, sort of put our hands around. And Jen, some of what you said, I think, ties into it. But over the last 3 months, we have seen a growth in membership, so of new members joining year over year, so compared to 2019. And we have asked many of those, what brought this about now. And, some of the answers, and this is anecdotal, we don't have it all, it's not quantitative data, but some of the answers include people saying they have the time to do it. So I think sometimes just having the mental space to choose how you're going to step forward, it can feel overwhelming with, as you mentioned, Jen, these compounding crises. It can often feel overwhelming to know what to do, but I think the urgency of this moment has sort of provided a push to greater clarity. So, I think is part of it. And, in some cases, the slowdown of the normal pace of work has created some space to make those commitments. An obstacle in the past has often, and will continue, I'm sure, is that 1% of top line sales is a big number, and it depends on sort of how your business model is structured, but that can be a large portion of profits for some companies too. So, oftentimes we have heard that the cost is high. And what's been interesting is as we're seeing the consumer data move in the direction of, purchase intent increasing for brands with a purpose. Recent stat that we saw is that something like 81% of consumers surveyed said that they would be extremely likely or very likely to purchase from a company that has aligned with an environmental cause. So, I think the consumer data is also sort of pushing toward, reducing that perceived cost of making a choice like that. So, I think right now what we're seeing is that there is that growth in interest in sort of cause for consumers. We're seeing, again, Jen, I think you said it well, the compounding crises that are making it really clear that, these are not sort of extra niceties. These are really part of what businesses need to be doing to contribute to a healthy future and to create a future where any business can thrive. And also, I think it is becoming clearer that employees, customers, all stakeholders, their expectation of businesses is that they're going to be part of the solution with government, with other players as well. But again, it's no longer, it's optional. It's more like, in what way are you going to make the choice? And I think that that's a really important piece of it. And I guess actually, sorry, one other thing that I would add is I think and just seeing one question that came in, I think being part of a community driving change is really important right now. One of the greatest challenges of the pandemic has been it's a hard time and we're isolated. And as humans, we typically come together in hard times. And so I think finding communities of change has been more important than ever, particularly given the nature of some of the challenges, the additional challenges we're facing. So I think finding those communities of change in this particular moment, has elevated the desire to belong to things, like 1% for the Planet, Conservation Alliance, things like that.
Kate, it brings up a follow-up question for you from our Q&A. Have you seen some examples of small businesses who maybe didn't feel like they had leverage or a big enough voice to amplify their values, so they went and partnered with bigger businesses or got a group together along shared values?
We do see some of that, and I think that's a big part of 1%. So every member that joins 1%, whether your actual numerical 1% is small or big, are all equal partners in the way that we're set up and have access to each other. So we do see brands, reaching out to each other, just sort of back end to, around solutions. How did you handle this problem? What was your packaging solution? Very tactical things. But then we also see brands coming together around, you know, giving strategies and things like that. That has been a little harder, I would say, during this particular time, because oftentimes those kinds of partnerships are forged at events and, you know, opportunities when people can kind of network freely and discover those crossovers. But we are trying to facilitate more of that, because that has been a really powerful part of the network.
Yeah, it seems like the more sort of industry-wide collaboration, whether it's the outdoor industry or whatever it might be, the more powerful we're all going to be, right? It's that rising tide thing. So that's great that you're helping facilitate that. Brady, a couple weeks ago on our webinar, we had Laura Hills from the NPD research group here, and they do tons of heavy data lifting, and their data shows that within the last 10 years, brands that have made a commitment to causes, whether it's public lands or sustainability or climate, what have you, diversity, they've continuously shown that those brands have excelled. Have you seen a similar trend with the brands that you work with in the Conservation Alliance, and when did it become okay to sort of talk about those issues? Because for a while it was sort of uncomfortable to talk about the issues, and now it's the opposite.
Well, similar to what Jen said, when did it become not okay to not talk about them is another way to kind of think about that. And I thought about this, and you know, the term corporate social responsibility was coined in the 1950s, and things really started ramping up in the 90s. So in some ways, these trends can be seen across many decades. But I think with the younger generations coming in, the millennials and Generation Z, there are some statistics, and maybe I'm repeating from the last seminar, but you know, 64% of those two generations won't take a job with a company that doesn't have some kind of corporate social responsibility practices. 85% of Gen Z employees think the companies that they work for have an obligation to solve social problems. And interestingly, 74% of customers wouldn't care if about 74% of the brands that they are affiliated with would just disappear. And so presumably we wouldn't want to be one of those brands. So we did a poll recently just within the outdoor industry, kind of trying to understand attitudes and behaviors within our industry around these issues, as well as the election and what might motivate people to come to the polls. And we found that about 80% of customers want to buy from companies whose values mirror their own. And it's important for those consumers that they hear from the top. So it shouldn't feel like, according to the research that we did, it shouldn't feel like it's just kind of a throwaway line on social. Statements coming from CEOs and backed up with action are important. So I think we're all in very strong agreement here that these trends are only increasing. It's only becoming more and more critical for businesses. And I also appreciate that when you're a business owner just struggling to survive right now, this all might sound like just a bunch of additional stuff to do. And I appreciate that. We certainly appreciate that at the Conservation Alliance. But I think the lesson is it just has to be part of the business model, regardless of the environment.
Well, I like the theme about just leading by example, whether you're a big company CEO or a small retailer, sort of putting your money where your mouth is, I guess it might be, but just like, standing up and leading for your employees. And Jenn, to you, I mean, Burton's a great example of that. Your founder, Jake, and his wife, Donna, have been so shining examples of leading in that way. We began this webinar with a session about diversity. It was 3 weeks ago. We were discussing that as it pertains to sustainability in small businesses. How do goals and strategies for improving diversity align with goals and strategies for sustainability? Like, where do those two things sort of cross over?
Yeah, I mean, sustainability is both about social and environmental responsibility and the intersections of the two. As mentioned earlier, there's been this shift in expectations toward a comprehensive view of corporate responsibility across business practices. But that said, there's also seemingly continued to be an outside focus on environmental responsibility. So environmental action, efficiencies, carbon reduction, environmental certifications, and also social impact primarily through charitable giving, which of course is very important, but it doesn't really get to the heart of the issue. So in the wake of the killing of Floyd, businesses seem to finally be taking notice that they need to meaningfully incorporate justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion into their practices. We cannot build sustainable companies, communities, and economies without ensuring fair treatment, equitable distribution of resources, access to opportunities, and representation. And so I think that, I don't have to say it, this is a big wake-up moment for a lot of businesses. And I think it's an incredibly important moment for businesses to be taking stock across all of their practices. One thing that Burton has done, which I think, we have a few questions coming in that relate specifically about how small businesses can be taking action, across environmental and social impact. And one thing that we found incredibly helpful is joining the B Corp community. So B Corps are companies that are verified to be balancing profit with purpose. So they're seeking to benefit workers, customers, community, and the environment through their business practices. And B Corps cross, different industries, businesses of all sizes, and it seems like they've been, growing very consistently through the pandemic even. Which really speaks to the importance of responsible business practices. And, to Kate's point earlier, we really need to be working as communities in the business community to better our practices, to lean on one another, to help one another kind of make change at an industry level, at a societal level. And so one thing that I think that a lot of businesses could do, looking at how they can better promote their own practices around diversity and other areas, is take the B impact assessment and really look at what is that gap, what is the best practice, and where are you falling, and what can you be taking action on in the immediate term. And there's great resources available for free from the B Corp nonprofit B Lab and a number of other organizations.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up B Corp, Jen. Let's throw up the B Corp information, the website in the chat, so that all of you attendees can click on that if you want more information about B Corp. Jen, to follow up, can you provide some specific examples of times where your brand took a stand and how that might have actually helped with consumer loyalty or increasing revenue?
Sure. I think we have been speaking out on climate action for a long time. We are a long-term partner of Protect Our Winters and very involved with them as a brand. But we had kind of a moment last September when the global climate strikes were starting to get organized by the Fridays for Future students around the world. And people were really starting to pay attention. And it was this moment as a brand where we had to decide, we promote our values, we offer opportunities for those customers that resonate with climate to take action with us, but are we willing to really put a stake in the sand? And we decided that we believe that the majority of our community would stand alongside us. And so we shut down the business around the world for 24 hours. We didn't take sales, not even on Burton.com. And we opened up all of our stores and offices as action centers to help our communities, our employees make signs, write text, call your senator, really start to take action and join the strikes in their local areas. And I can tell you that we had sales losses that day for sure, but we felt confident that people would return to us at a later date to make those purchases, that we might even invite new customers into the brand as a result of our willingness to take a stand. And year to date, that was the most media attention that we'd earned as a brand. So for us, that was, I would say that really solidified our belief that we could put our values out front and our community would not only back us up, but join us.
I have to ask what the vibe was like in the office when that decision came down, like, we're going to shut down. Was that scary? Were you wondering if this was going to be a total disaster?
I think it might have been a little scary for people in sales roles, but the general vibe was, there was a lot of pride a lot of people stopping me in
That's
the
good.
hallway to say, like, I am so proud to work for this company. And I think, you know, overall really positive and a lot of energy. And it also provided the opportunity, you know, I feel very privileged to have sustainability in my title. It's work I'm passionate about. I get to do it every day. But things like the climate strike and other ways of integrating sustainability throughout a business, especially in a smaller business where it's necessary, really gives the opportunity for other employees to get involved. And so the climate strike was this opportunity for, it doesn't matter what role you're in, you could be in facilities, you could be in finance, you could be in sales or retail. You were also putting sustainability out front that day and getting paid for it as well.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Kate, I'm curious, for 1% for the Planet, you work with so many brands. Do you have a similar example of one of your brand partners who kind of did something outside the box?
Yeah, and there are, you know, again, many of our brands do a great job with that and have, you know, examples across the country and across the world. I think the most striking one where we have the best data is from Patagonia in 2016 on Black Friday, which, as you recall, 2016 was after a certain election had taken place. And similarly to what you were describing, Jen, I think there was a, you know, should we shut down? Should we do this? Should we do that? And Patagonia went back and forth. And, you know, 1% for the Planet was, you know, we were doing our job over here. And then about 5 days before Black Friday, we got a call saying, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to donate 100% of our sales to environmental nonprofits on Black Friday, or, you know, 100% of the sales on that day will go to environmental nonprofits. So we're like, great, do it. And they created a great little, you know, logo for the day. And then, you know, and then it was off. And it was pretty amazing to see actually the sales exceeded projections by about 5x. And they projected maybe 2 million in sales. It was 10 million in sales. It was about 70% new customers. And then, you know, there was a feeling of like, all right, that was a great day, but like the holidays are going to just drop off. And it just kept going. And so it was a really strong statement that really, you know, did bring in a lot of people. And we talked to a lot of our members, and that about 80% of the 1% for the Planet network is small businesses. So we were actively talking to members who are saying like, I can't really do that. I can't afford to not sell anything for a period of time. And so, you know, there are a lot of ways that, you know, people really creatively either identified certain products that they would, you know, promote and donate from that, or, you know, they would take a stand in other ways. They would, you know, continue to sell, but open their shops for, you know, organizing people to sign petitions or things like that. So there was, you know, a lot of action, but I think the Patagonia Black Friday example just, you know, really brings home the fact that, you know, there is a time and a place when boldness can really be the best strategy, even if it, you know, is a risk and does, you know, mean that in the short term there's a cost.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think one statistic that you just mentioned that jumps out at me is 70% were new customers. So in terms of building a brand base and with new customers like that, that's really incredible. Brady, a couple questions for you now. One that I have, and then one that's kind of come in through the chat. When it comes to taking a stand for public lands or climate or other sustainability issues, whatever it might be, in this day and age, it can often feel like it requires getting into maybe some partisan politics there, which is too bad. And it can be risky, I guess, particularly for small businesses. How can businesses get involved, speak to their customers and their consumers without getting partisan?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think it is easy to feel like if you take a look at what's going on, and especially national politics, I think thoughtful business owners might not want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But I think it's not the case that conservation, so I'm going to speak to conservation issues since that's what I know best and what we know best. It's just not the case that it's a partisan issue. Well, it is true that this current administration has done some unprecedentedly bad things to dismantle the bedrock environmental laws that have been the root of many of the gains that we have enjoyed since the middle of the last century. The truth is that President Trump signed the Land and Water Conservation Fund bill, the Great American Outdoors Act. And what does that tell us? that tells us that the calculus is now that conservation issues have been elevated to electoral issues. They're important enough that they actually might move elections. So that's one indication that it's a bipartisan issue. We did some research again on these things. We found that protecting public lands and waters, like that concept, it isn't partisan. There's a majority support in that, from conservatives to independents to people who are further on the left. If you take a look at the spectrum of environmental issues, climate change continues to be somewhat politically polarized, but less so over time. And I think that what's the key takeaway for businesses is that if you can speak with integrity and authenticity, and you can speak using facts and to issues that are core to your brand and to your beliefs and your values, you're going to be okay. And not only are you going to be okay, you're going to benefit from that. And I think one of the things that we do with our member companies is help them on that path and try to help them find issues and messages that they can share, or even maybe give them some advice. One thing I want to mention, I'll put this in the chat. We're going to do a deeper dive on the polling results that might be interesting to some people on this webinar, and that's going to be at 10 a.m. on August 27th. We're going to go over a webinar with our polling results and what people can do to drive their employees or even their customers to the polls, which I think is another nonpartisan act that people can do. One little quick sneak peek, about 78% of outdoor consumers are likely to go to the polls. But if you take a look at what does that also say, 22% are not very likely to go to the polls, which is about 25 million people. So, and some of those people, especially younger people in urban areas, are actually looking to brands for some indication of what to do. And so again, the takeaway here is that brands, not only do you have, I think, a responsibility, but an opportunity to actually have a real impact. So anyway, there are some thoughts.
Yeah, those are great. And you mentioned that 22% in the outdoor industry. That is a big number. And those margins, if we go back to 2016, would have completely changed the election. So I know at Protect Our Winners, they're very focused on states with large outdoor recreation communities on leveraging everybody. Your message is well received. Get out there and vote. That's a very good point. And a follow-up question that came through the chat. What do you think the implications are, Brady, of a Biden-Harris win? And what can businesses do right now to potentially put themselves in position to take advantage of those changes that might come with that new administration?
Well, I will, let me say this, as a 501c,
you don't have to get political.
No, as a 501c3 organization, I can't get involved in electoral politics. So
right.
I encourage everyone to vote. I encourage everyone to be informed. That being said, of course, we're thinking about what the differences might be between a Biden and a Trump administration. And we don't know all the details of what a Biden administration might look like, but we know that we've got public statements that he and his administration would protect some of the most important landscapes that we're interested in protecting, specifically the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the Tongass, and other things. And so I think it's safe to say that that administration would be better caretakers, frankly, of our bedrock environmental laws. In terms of what that might mean for businesses and the regulatory environment, you know, I can't tell you. When it comes to trade policy, that is one of the more complicated things that you can wade into, and that is out of my area of expertise. Yeah. Maybe that wasn't what the question was, but I just had to put that out there.
No, fair enough, fair enough. It kind of reminded me, actually, I wanted to have an offline conversation with you in the future about the Pebble mine in Alaska. Something I'm interested in what's going on up there. Well, yes. All right, so this is a question, sort of a broad question for all of you. Throughout this 4-part webinar series, we've been exploring this theme of building back better. And Jen, you mentioned it earlier. And that's included everything from improving diversity and racial issues at small businesses to why climate and other causes can be an essential part of your business platform, just to adopting day-to-day operations in light of the pandemic and why businesses need to pay attention to sustainability. So from your perspective, what are the top maybe one or two things, little insights that you've seen that you think can help small businesses right now? Jenn, let's start with you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I would add a word to that phrase. I would say build back better together.
Good. I like it.
Both, the business with the customer in mind, and to Brady's point, really thinking about what authentically you can speak to, you can promote action on, nonpartisan issues like getting out to vote. But it's also as businesses, and I know that we have an audience coming from a number of different industries, a number of different business sizes on the line, and so I would say, for Burton's part, we've really been able to grow our responsible business practices and continue to do so through collaboration and through learning from other businesses. And so whether that's through your local chapter of Business for Social Responsibility, or through partnerships with groups like Protect Our Winters, 1% for the Planet, also at the Conservation Alliance. So I think really reaching out to learn from others and lean on others is incredibly important, because if you try to go it alone, especially as a small business, it's going to be an uphill battle that's unnecessary, especially when it comes to responsible practices. People are incredibly willing to share information, to share resources, and to help lift one another up.
Great. Thank you for that, Jenn. Kate, how about from your perspective at 1%?
Yeah, I guess two things come to mind for me. One is, I think this challenging time is actually a time where we're having an opportunity to create some convergence around issues that I think it will serve us really well to carry forward. And, specifically, I think moving forward, it will not be an option to see sustainability as not inclusive of environment and justice for all people. And so I think really, stepping into the opportunity to build those connections. So, I think as small businesses looking for that authentic cause, I think there's that, really great broad territory to, move into that intersection where you can connect social and environmental issues in a really meaningful way. And then the other thing that is, to me, always really important with any big important thing in life is to figure out one step that you can do first and do that, and break it down to size, because it can be really overwhelming, and it can also feel expensive and daunting, and like you have so many other issues to deal with, particularly as a small business in these times. So taking one step sets you up to then take the next step. So I think relieving yourself of the sense that you have to do it all at once, and creating authentic ways that you can just figure out what's that first step that I'm going to take that will then, get me connected to some other people that I can take further steps with. So that's one of my beliefs, and I think that's really important right now.
That's great, Kate. Thank you. And we've got some great questions that come in on the Q&A, but Brady, before we get to that, a couple little insights from you.
Yeah, I've got two quick ones. I don't know about y'all, but this has been a trying time. And one of the ways I've gotten sane is just by going out and enjoying some of the spaces that are close to where I live. And so I think one big takeaway for me is just how critically important it is that public lands, public spaces are important to our mental and physical health right now. So I just think businesses, if you haven't done so, just paying attention to what's in your backyard. What are the issues? Are there things that you can shed light on where you are? Is a great first step. Another step that doesn't cost any money, but can be a little bit of a hassle because there's a lot of inertia around this, is take a look at where you're banking. If you have values as a company, and you have your assets at a bank that is completely antithetical to those values, maybe you should think about that. It's something certainly that we're thinking about at the Conservation Alliance. And I think it's something meaningful. I think that's an element of corporate social responsibility that is getting more and more attention, especially with the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and most banks having taken a public stand that they won't publicly fund oil and gas exploration there. So I would just really encourage businesses to take a look at their banking practices.
That's a really good point, Brady. And I have to say, just on a personal note, when I started looking into the money pipeline that's feeding fossil fuel industry and the few big banks that are actually doing that, I found out that my mortgage and my credit card was with one of those banks. So this spring, I actually moved all of that to Bank of the West and their 1% for the Planet account. So that personally felt like a really good move. So anyway, we've got some great questions coming in. Brady, I want to stick with you because this is a question directed at you. We'd love to hear how the Conservation Alliance has tried to persuade business owners to partner with an org like yours. What do you do to persuade organizations or businesses to get involved? What pressure points do you try to use?
I mean, anything, all the elements of sales, right? No, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, there's two elements to our, I'll keep this very brief. There's two elements to our programming. We give money away. One of our key insights is that we think that in the environmental landscape, these small, highly focused grassroots environmental organizations are relatively underfunded. So you can write big checks to the big NGOs, and that's great. But we think that our members get a huge bang for their buck through our grant program, 100% pass through, and we vet these highly effective, very efficient grassroots organizations. And so we think that if you're a company that cares a lot about these issues, you get a heck of a lot of value and actually don't have to do the investment of infrastructure and potentially staff on your own. So that's one selling point. But what we find is that by participating in the grant program, companies start to get engaged, they're starting to think about issues. And then the threshold issue, and hopefully we start doing this again post-COVID, one threshold issue is when someone from the company comes to one of our fly-ins in Washington, D.C., suits up or pantsuits up or whatever they're wearing, and shows up in front of one of their representatives and starts to try to advocate for an issue. And realizes, wait a second, I can do this. And the way that things change in Washington is by people like me caring, paying attention, and showing up. And so for us, it's a 1-2. I think the grant program is really accessible and very safe, frankly, way. And then as people get more engaged and finally come to Washington with us, we find that we have got a lot of these companies really deeply involved. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Kate, for you, since you mentioned Patagonia and their Black Friday event, we have a question from Jonathan. How did Patagonia Advertiser communicate that Black Friday concept and action to reach on that particular day so many new customers? Do you have any idea of the strategy behind that?
Well, as I mentioned, it was pulled together very last minute, like less than a week. So it was largely I think sort of a network effect in terms of, social sharing. So we put it out through our channels, they put it out through their channels, and it got shared from there. So I think it was largely a social campaign. Patagonia might have a slightly different answer. I wasn't as close to those details, but given the short timeline, it was really just leveraging existing social channels primarily.
Great, thanks. Yeah, certainly a powerful social voice that they have there at Patagonia. Jenn, here's a question for you. What kind of tactics have you taken to get P&L owners in your company thinking about advocating for sustainability and thinking more about cause? That's
a difficult one. I think it really varies by what you're pushing for. If you go to the basic kind of risk lens, you can really look at things as simple as compliance, right? There's a lot of companies that aren't even going to the level of compliance for social and environmental impact right now. And so looking at, let's look 5 years out. Regulations are changing, they're becoming stricter. What is it going to cost us to be reactive versus being proactive right now? So really kind of looking out a few years definitely helps, but that's kind of the more negative view of how to approach sustainability. So on the positive side, I think it's also looking at, you might need to question what your positioning is as a brand. So who are you benchmarking against, right? So if you're still benchmarking on cost against, for a product or service that is against a competitive set that you don't really want to be sitting next to. If you want to go to the next level, you really need to be looking at that and benchmarking against that versus just looking at what are the increased costs immediately. I know that can be incredibly hard in the face of a pandemic. I think this is a really good time, though, to reconsider how business is being carried out, period, right? Like if you had asked us to cut our travel budgets last year. Everyone would be aghast. Oh, we don't get to go fly and see the factory and touch the product and make sure that, we're going to the events and the conferences, and nobody's going to conferences right now. So that cost has just been pulled. So rethinking, like, how are we actually, I'm not saying we shouldn't be traveling specifically, but how are we approaching business? This is an opportunity right now to rethink that. Well, everyone's looking at their balance sheet, a little bit worried. And I also think there needs to be an element of creativity to it, right? Like, in my role in sustainability at Burton, I don't determine exactly how we meet our goals. I help to set the strategy and partner with colleagues throughout the company to help us get there. But by setting goals 3, 5, 10 years out, you're giving people targets to work toward, and they'll find creative ways to help get there. You don't need to have the answer today for what's going to happen 5 years from now. Just kind of checking the feasibility of it. So I think just bringing both some real numbers to the table. The costs are important, but also making sure that you're looking at it through the lens of the opportunity and the long-term feasibility.
That's a great answer. Thank you. This one's for all of you. And I think that there's a lot of young people out there who look at the outdoor industry and think that that's where I want to work. That looks fun. It's healthy. It's active. It's a great industry to work in. So this question is, what advice can you give to someone who dreams of working for a company that is a leader in corporate social responsibilities? And again, it's not just the outdoor industry. It could be any industry. Do you have any advice for perhaps a young person who's interested in working for a company that really shares a strong value in corporate social responsibility? Kate, do you want to start off?
Sure. I guess the main thing I would say is figure out what you love and what you want to do all day. If you're interested in accounting, or if you want to be more on the marketing side, all of those skills are needed in industries that are aligned with your values. And those industries need you to have those skills. So, think of the ways that you can bring your passions and your skills to the table with the companies that you want to work with. And I think you do want that marriage of passion and skill, because you do want to help these companies or nonprofits to be the best, not the best in comparison just to, that particular industry, but the best of all the rest. So, having that connection between the best skills and the best passions. So I think that fortunately there are many opportunities out there now, working at places like Burton. I'm sure you guys are mobbed with applicants anytime you have an opening, but I think that's true across many of these companies. So that skill and passion combination would be where I would come out.
I definitely, that resonates with me. Passion is everything. And I have 3 young, or they're not that young, 3 kids. And I'm just like, I don't care what you guys love, as long as you love something, it just really will take you far in your life, whether it's in business or personal life. Brady or Jenn, do you want to comment at all on that question?
Yeah, I'll chip in. I agree with the skills that Kate mentioned. I mean, just be really good at something that the company or the organization that you want to be a part of needs. That's one thing. But the other thing, and so that gets a certain threshold, but when there's 20 resumes in front of me, I'm looking for evidence of value alignment, that this isn't something that occurred to the person 2 days ago. Are the personal activities or the volunteer activities, is there evidence that we have deep value alignment? Maybe there's some affiliation with our organization previously. That isn't mandatory, but once you've kind of gotten in the door with your skills, I'm as someone who's hiring occasionally looking for evidence of that deep value alignment, and because that's something you, as an employer, you can't really fix. There's a lot of things you can make course adjustments, but if you're not, if your team isn't aligned with the values that your organization or company stands for, that's a hard one to fix.
Jenn, any thoughts on that one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say there is no perfection in sustainability. If we are successful, we're moving the benchmark on ourselves and the industry forward, and there are always going to be issues to solve. So really looking for people that are able to identify an issue and propose a solution and really be proactive about that, who's really interested in creating change and has demonstrated that in their experience. And then I would also say, think about what role you might currently be in, because there might be a way for you to help your own company become more sustainable and to find, meaningful work through that. And it's especially true when you're already within a business. You already have so much knowledge of how it functions, what the challenges are. So you are incredibly valuable already. And so more like pitching how to bring that into your role. I think a lot of people have found great success in that, including Allie Kenny, who started our sustainability department here in 2012 and is still with the company.
That's
Chris, can I just
great.
add one
Yeah.
really quick thing?
Go ahead.
I want to say one thing, like specifically with the outdoor industry, I think there's this sense that it's kind of insular, like we hire from within and it's a club. And I think in light of all the things that are happening in 2020, there are a lot of brands that are trying really hard to pull new perspectives and hire from new communities and communities that aren't as well represented in our industry. So I would just say that the one other additional thing is, if you don't feel like you fit into this industry, please apply. Please, there's a lot of companies that are going to likely be very open to your candidacy. And I think there's also companies that are truly embracing diversity and understanding that different life experiences, different opinions coming from different backgrounds is just a good business decision. And so I just encourage everybody listening to consider that too.
No, that's a really good point, Brady. And I think that ties together this overall conversation that a lot of these decisions around sustainability and economics are good business decisions, even if they don't feel like it in the short term. And with that said, I want to thank you guys. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Brady. Thanks, Kate. This has been a great webinar. I want to thank all of our attendees. This is going to conclude the fourth and final webinar in our 4-part series, Navigating Change. But I want to remind you that all of these sessions have been recorded and they're available to watch on the website, which is sustainablerecovery.us. I want to thank Bank of the West and SIA, Snowsports Industries of America, as well as Protect Our Winners, who were our presenting sponsors for this series. And just a big thanks out to all of you, our panelists that joined us each week, and to our presenting sponsors once again. It's only when we can all band together as a collective industry, people for action that we move the needle on the issues we care about, and these organizations do it as well. So thanks so much to all of you. If you have follow-up questions, definitely send them in on the website. There's a bunch of resources on the chat right now that you can click on for further reading. So with that said, I've been your moderator. It's been an honor, Chris Davenport. Thank you guys so much. And I wish you your health and safety. Get outdoors and play as much as possible. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.